I thought it would be topical to talk about Mass Effect specifically within the context of the greater gaming world. I'll say this briefly about the Amazon show. It is very, very unlikely that this show will be any good. If you look at Amazon's track record of producing LARP shows, which are meant to emulate some of the best we have in terms of fiction, it usually doesn't turn out well. Usually it does not. Anyway, that's not what I wanted to talk about in this video. But I did think the Mass Effect show was a good occasion to broach another subject that is related. So, most of you have played Mass Effect, and I played it too. I like it a lot. I am, in terms of what I enjoy, someone who's more of a fantasy type of guy. But I do like science fiction to a more limited degree, especially if it's done well. And there's no question that, for better or worse, Mass Effect is one of those space opera series that is a classic. It has left a very powerful legacy, and there are many people, I know for example Lord Slandered, who consider Mass Effect their favorite game. So I like Mass Effect a lot. And one of the things that's good about Mass Effect is the universe has a lot of things going for it. And in it, on top of that. For example, you have many different factions, different types of aliens, a great deal of friction between these factions and aliens at times, different goals, and deep-seated politics within the context of the universe of Mass Effect. Now, I'm going to argue here that you could never make a Mass Effect game as it was in today's current gaming climate. It would simply be impossible. For the very obvious reason that if you were to make such a game, everything that made it good would be sanitized into oblivion. You would see nothing of it. And the example here that I wish to talk more about and take apart in this context is the example of the Krogan. The species of aliens, you might know them, that sort of look like giant frog people, but they have an important place in the Mass Effect setting, a very important one. Now you might be asking yourself right now, why on earth could you not have the Krogan in a Mass Effect game in the year 2024? How is that even possible? Well, for the simple reason of the ever so tiresome, relentless, and never-ending real-life politics in games. You see, the Krogan, by their very nature as a species, are inherently violent. Almost all of them. The females less so, but that's very typical for a lot of species, particularly among mammals. Basically, the Krogan are by their very nature bellicose, aggressive, and quick to anger. Now, this nature is evolved, and this evolved nature fits neatly within the narrative of their planet Tuchanka in the Mass Effect universe. Tuchanka is a very dangerous planet. It's filled with a dangerous, abrasive environment, terrifying life forms such as the Thresher Maw, and basically the Krogan evolved within this environment a brutal, harsh landscape to have a lot of features that make them highly adapted to surviving there and reproducing. For example, Krogan display a sort of organ redundancy, which is to say, they have multiple organs in many cases to help them survive better in their brutal, harsh environment. Now, psychologically speaking, as I've mentioned, the Krogan have also evolved an especially aggressive, bellicose, and belligerent psychology. In order to survive on a planet such as Tuchanka, they had to physically evolve certain adaptations to the planet, and mentally as well. So you can sort of look at the Krogan as the ultimate warriors, as it were. They are highly adaptable, very aggressive, and warlike. And these attributes in their totality are perfect for the environment that the Krogan evolved in, which is Tuchanka. Now, this backstory is very important because the Krogan, as I've mentioned, play an important role within the history of the setting of Mass Effect. But for all of these features, the Krogan were not very advanced in terms of their technology. But it just so happened that the Council races, the races who wield political power and influence at the Citadel, were in a bit of a pickle. And specifically, the Solarians and the Turians were in a bit of a pickle. You see, they had encountered this menace called the Rachni. The Rachni are an insectoid race that were very dangerous, very aggressive, and very expansive. So the Solarians basically come along and they see these Krogan, who are especially adapted to dealing with harsh environments and surviving some pretty brutal punishment if need be, and they think to themselves, we really need these guys to help us deal with the Rachni threat. And so what do? They uplift the Krogan with contemporary technology that the Krogan hitherto had not had access to. And the Solarians say to them, look, you guys have what it takes to deal with this Rachni menace. We'll uplift you, we'll help you out, we'll scratch your back if you scratch ours. Now it turns out that the Krogan are, as predicted, very effective at dealing with the Arachni. And something I didn't mention before is that they reproduce very quickly, which allows them to replace their losses rather quickly, which makes them basically the perfect weaponized species/race to implement against the Arachni. And they end up more or less destroying the Arachni. There's a separate story about the Arachni within the context of Mass Effect, obviously, but that is a separate issue. But what then happens? The Krogan notice that the other races are kind of weak and puny, and they don't reproduce as quickly, nor are they as tough or resilient as the Krogan are. And what do? After the so-called Arachni Wars are over, they expand within the galaxy, and they act aggressively and belligerently towards the other races. Now, because of a combination of factors, their aggressive psychology, their physiology, and the fact that they reproduce so quickly, they are giving the other species of the galaxy a whooping, so to speak. And so something needs to be done. You can't beat them in traditional warfare. They're too tough, too numerous, they reproduce too quickly. So what happens? The Solarians come up with a bioweapon called the genophage. And this genophage originally was meant to completely sterilize the Krogan population. It's later modified by a guy called Mordin Solus to simply reduce reproduction to an absolute limit of what is necessary to maintain the population. And the Turians, working in concert with the Solarians, deploy this bioweapon, and over time the Krogan population is dramatically reduced by the use of this weapon. And this, of course, is the nutshell version of what happened. For those of you who are not familiar with Mass Effect, I thought that was necessary, this exposition. The reason why you couldn't talk about this at all in today's 2024 atmosphere is because all of the stuff I've talked about, manipulating and weaponizing an entire population, the weaponized population itself, threatening others, and the threat, of course, of genocide. Because the Krogan population is so small that what do? They fall into a sort of collective, species-level depression, and their aggression is amped up even more because the stakes are so high. The males fight each other even more for the sake of reproduction, and a lot of them just give up and become mercenaries. And so involving the Krogan, the Arachni, the Solarians, Mordin Solus specifically, there's this entire ethical dilemma, and it involves some pretty hardcore stuff. Genocide, bioweapons, abortion. You can find all of that in the story of the Krogan in the context of Mass Effect and how they interact with other species and vice versa. But the problem is, in today's day and age, that stuff is way too hardcore for the current day audience, or so we're told at least. So you quite literally couldn't even create the Krogan as a feature in the game. Let's go over the basics one last time. The Krogan are inherently aggressive. Yes, this aggression is amplified by the genophage, but they're an aggressive species by nature. And they enjoy fighting because of the environment they evolved in. That is their nature. Where's the problem here? Well, I can assure you that some weirdo from the real world will inject some weird interpretation of what the Krogan actually are meant to represent from the real world and call it problematic. Because again, the Krogan are not a nice species. They're aggressive. They are warlike. They like fighting and hurting things. Never mind the complexities and difficulties of deploying a bioweapon that threatens to effectively annihilate the entirety of a species. These are not issues you could touch with a 10-foot pole in today's current gaming climate. And yet, back in the day, Mass Effect did. Now, whether or not you can find some real-world analog to the situation with the Krogan, or how they are or how they're not, it doesn't really matter. And the history of the Krogan, and the Genophage, and the Solarians, and the Turians, these are great examples of complex, difficult politics woven into the story within the confines of a setting. You do not need to extrapolate from this onto the real world, or extrapolate from the real world onto this. You can do that if you want, but if you do that, please leave the rest of us alone with these thoughts. These people who support this never-ending interference of politics in games are many times the same people who purport to love Mass Effect, allegedly, and yet they would deny some of the core elements of Mass Effect. Sometimes, in order to express something, art is risky, and the story of the Krogan and the Genophage is just such a risk, and it was a risk that paid off. because it enriched the story of Mass Effect at the end of the day. I don't know why they don't understand this or see this. These people who refuse to acknowledge that this is a problem, that we can't have complex, morally ambiguous and difficult situations in games, dark, grim stories in games. They are part of the problem, and yet at the same time they claim to yearn for more RPGs like Mass Effect. I don't know if they're blind to their own hypocrisy or it's something else entirely, and I won't waste my time on speculation in this regard. Now, I think I've laid out the case for why you could never have the Krogan in a modern game made in 2024. It's too quote-unquote problematic to make use of the newfangled, newly applied neologism that people bandy about all the time these days, because the story's core elements are simply not permissible in today's gaming world. Now, as I've laid out this case, I want to move on to another topic which I think is important to address. In my previous video, I received some feedback that I was too harsh and not charitable enough to various people who enjoy games in a way that's different to the way I enjoy them. And normally, I would take that on board and say, that's fair. The problem is I've been dealing with these people, the political activists who want to turn games into a battlefield for their stupid politics for close to 10 years now, both online and off, and certainly in my favorite hobby of gaming. I have tried over the last 10 years to be charitable and to show grace to them, to attempt to understand their standpoints, their perspectives. Do you know what we get in return when we do this? We get stomped into the ground, because it's essentially trying to be graceful to the graceless. These people are not reasonable. I will talk to anyone and be charitable to anyone who is reasonable, but these people are not reasonable, not at all. I have dealt with them for 10 years now, and time and again, they have failed to show basic human decency, etiquette, and charity in a way that I have always striven to do so towards them, and I have observed others attempt to do so towards them. And what happens? They take a big fat dump on it. They take advantage of your kindness, your charity, your willingness to talk to them, your willingness to be reasonable. It's the old adage, give them an inch and they'll take a mile. I've had it up to here. I am done being charitable to people that want to turn modern games into a political battleground for their nonsense. Get them the hell out of there. We're tired of it. And these people are not the nice people they purport to be. Frequently, they're cruel, manipulative, cowardly. I am not interested in going out of my way after a decade of attempting to be nice to these sorts of people in continuing to be nice. This is basically akin to helping the guy who wants to kill you find your location so he can execute you more quickly. That's basically what this is. I simply don't have the patience anymore, and again, as I've said, I've endeavored to be charitable, to show grace, to try to understand other perspectives. And what do I get in return? And what have others gotten in return? Nothing. Less than nothing. So I'm going to remain firm on this subject, henceforth. Games are meant to be platforms of escapism, creativity, art, fun. We don't want these games to continue to be a battleground for modern-day politics. Get any sort of politics in these games the hell out. Now, this doesn't just apply to left-wing politics. If there are people on the right, say Bible-thumping Baptists, that insisted on injecting Christianity or Jesus in fantasy or sci-fi or fictional games, religion from the real world, and it were completely unsubtle and relentless, I would be objecting just as vociferously as I do here. Get these goddamn politics out of games. We just want fun games that are entertaining, with good stories that make you think, and if you want to, on your own, think about these things in some sort of historical and political context as it exists on Earth, then by all means do so, but leave the rest of us the hell alone with it, please. Anyway, if you like my videos and my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. It's much appreciated, as it helps out the channel with its growth. And I'll talk to you next time. Take care.